So hello and welcome to Resilience at Work. This is Neil Wilkins and I'm the host for this webinar, which is part of a series. And if this is the first time you have been into this series, you may not be aware that this is webinar 13. We've conducted 12 previous webinars on a whole host of personal and professional development topics. And if you are a regular attendee in this series, you'll know that we've been building a little bit of a story really as we've gone on a whole host of subjects that are very pertinent right here, right now, in this very kind of chaotic and uncertain world that we are living in. And it's been really quite an interesting journey, and we have seen a number of tools that have been themes, if you like, through many of these webinars, and some topics that have really stood out as being very, very important, and irrespective of the level of seniority that we actually have in our organisations. And the really interesting thing is that a lot, if not all of these topics, are affecting everybody to a greater or lesser extent. And the topic that we're going to be talking about today, resilience, is one that is a really, really, and in fact, you could almost call it profound topic right here, right now, because resilience, the ability to cope with situations in all their various guises, is a really, really important subject, a really important thing and skill that even if it isn't something that really comes perfectly naturally to us, we can actually learn. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, resilience at work. This will be followed up with the final three webinars of this year. We have a new program all in development for next year, which I'm really excited about, but we do not want to go out on a low. We are definitely going out of this series in 2021 on a high. The subjects that we're going to be covering for the rest of this year, on the 26th of November, we've got the benefits of collaboration. We all need to collaborate right here, right now, particularly through the planning period. Many of us are doing our marketing, communication, sales, business development, growth, strategy plans, and it is all about collaboration with all stakeholders to create plans and to create a future beginning next year that is both relevant but also really, really appropriate to the world that we live in. So the benefits of collaboration are going to be loud and clear on the 26th of November. And then as we go into December, we're going to really turn our attention back on ourselves and the contributions that we make. And one of the really, really important topics, and I've been studying this for quite a number of years now, is the concept of reflection. Building and creating and developing reflection skills, the ability to kind of look inward and reflect on situations, scenarios, behaviors, the way we feel and think in certain encounters and certain contexts is a really, really important topic. And particularly a lot of us, through January and the early part of the new year, set our resolutions for the upcoming year. The ability to be able to reflect appropriately and in a timely manner is a really important thing for this time of the year. And a lot of us, as we kind of go into the winter time, it's a very different season, really, for many of us. And again, if you're in a seasonal kind of business, maybe you're going a little bit into hibernation, or you're starting to kind of take stock. Reflection is a very important thing to do. And that will be an extension of today's resilience webinar. So nice little kind of link there with that. And then as we go to the final one on the 17th of December, we'll be looking at self-motivation. And that is very much about kind of waking up in the morning with amazingly good, strong habits to create an environment and an experience really in every day that we encounter both work and in our private lives. And some of the things that we can do to become self-motivated when times get a little bit tough, or when, as I think a lot of us are finding right now, we just don't really feel like we have enough time to be doing things. We're going to look at self-motivation and kind of taking the reins of our lives. And again, because this is very much around planning time, both planning personally, but also professionally. So as you can see, we're going out on a real high at the end of this webinar series. And so that will be 16 webinars that we've gone through. this year on this subject of personal and professional development. And it's been a really, really interesting concept, if you like, because what we've tried to do as we've gone through these is to kind of really sort of see this as, you know, pieces of a jigsaw. So as we've gone through each of these topics, we've tried to kind of link the individual pieces of the jigsaw together so that we can really understand kind of really in lots of ways, you know, how they fit together to give us, you know, the best opportunity to find, you know, our best selves, both personally and also professionally. So, you know, really, really interesting kind of joining of these things together. But right here, right now, and I've said this a number of times with a few of the topics that we've talked about, some of these topics are just really, really pertinent right now. And I would think probably out of all of the webinars that we've done to this point, this is the one that is most pertinent right here, right now. It's never been more timely because of the chaos, the adversity, the personal difficulties that a lot of people are going through. There's, you know, significantly high levels of anxiety. I'm sure you have family, friends, and work colleagues who are kind of just really feeling it right now. And so what we need to do is really understand how we personally can become more resilient, but, you know, probably at work, but certainly in our private lives as well. And really define resilience, because what we can do once we get a little bit of a grasp of some of these tools that I'm going to be talking to you about, we can then potentially use these tools to identify, you know, the opportunity to share with others these techniques. Because once you become a little bit more resilient, once you become a little bit more aware of contexts and situations and how you can adapt to them quickly and then recover from these situations, you become really valuable to those around you, because you'll spot very, very quickly others going through some of these difficulties. So let's define resilience to get us moving. You know, I always like to begin with a definition that kind of sets the scene. So to me, resilience is the capacity to quickly recover from adversity, chaos, and difficulties. Okay, it's not about being tough. I think a lot of people think of, oh, that person's really resilient. In other words, they can take a lot on the chin, you know, they can really sort of cope with problems and just, you know, grind through it. To me, that's not what resilience is about. Resilience is the capacity to recover. It isn't about just taking things and, you know, absorbing them and sort of taking it, you know, full on the chest and, you know, taking that beating and, oh, I'm really strong. It's not what resilience is about. Resilience is about being very mindful. It's about understanding the context or the situation. It's about critiquing it, and then it's about recovery. It's really interesting. I can always remember when I used to play sort of club rugby, and one of our sort of fitness coaches told me, really, I mean, he was talking to all of us, but it really resonated with me. He said that, you know, fitness is not all about what you can do. It's about how quickly you recover from what you do. And this was an ex-military. I mean, he was in the Marines. He was, you know, tough as you like. But it was a really profound statement that's always stayed with me. And this is many, many years ago. The fact that, you know, fitness, and we could talk about, you know, mental fitness here, is not your capacity to do something. It's how quickly you can recover from doing what you do. And of course, then that's a real leveler, because it means that if you're resilient, it doesn't matter what the world throws at you. It's your capacity to recover from it. It's not how much you can take on yourself. And that puts a slightly different context into the conversation that we're going to have in this webinar, because what it means is that actually we can all do this, because we can all make the choices to actually recover in a more appropriate way from the adversities that, you know, present themselves to us. And let's face it, we are all being presented with challenges right now. And one of the things, obviously, that if we choose not to recover quickly, is that we can find that we can get physical and mental and emotional reactions to not being particularly resilient. There's a lot of research out there. You've only got to Google this to find lots of statistics. One that I, you know, sort of really found that stood out to me is the whole idea about resilience or lack of resilience and stress. or the perception of stress within you. And of course, this can manifest in, illness, dis-ease. It can manifest in, just a long-term kind of feeling of anxiety, which obviously doesn't serve any of us at all. And people low on resilience, so the ability to recover from a situation, are 4 times, according to this study by BetterUp, 4 times more likely to experience burnout as a direct result from that stress. So they'll be taking more time off work, they won't be enjoying life so much, they won't be contributing so much, and just their overall quality of life will be lower. So this is something we do need to really take seriously. This is not something we can just say, oh yeah, I can just brush it under the carpet. Right here, right now, with the amount of change, the amount of stuff that's going on, and this word uncertainty, I know I'm going to be saying this a number of times in this webinar, this word uncertainty is something we really need to consider right here, right now. So resilience is for managing now, it's for managing the moment, it's for supporting the people in your team and those around you. If you're in a leadership role, it's for leading your team. Understanding resilience and its importance is critical, absolutely critical, for how we're going to be managing the change going forward. Big study by Concur, and you can go and see this on their website, concur.co.uk, did a big study over the impact of the pandemic and the situations and the changes from 2020 across a variety of different countries and lots of different markets. And over 500 senior executives were interviewed, and 88% said that their businesses have now changed and will forever change. And that's really important, because it's how the business is going to operate brings in this element of the need for, managing uncertainty and for being resilient. And 93% of them said that, they agree that maintaining organizational agility is the only way to navigate uncertainty. In other words, actually embracing tools and techniques for managing being resilient. So not just taking it, but actually being able to recover from a change and from the uncertainty. That is the way that businesses are going to grow in the future. And of course, what is a subset of a business? It's you and it's me. It's the people within these organizations. So this directly applies to us managing ourselves. So despite what you have been told in the past about being resilient is all about being tough, cold, not caring, it's all about being strong. It isn't about being strong. Being resilient is about clearly assessing a situation and then giving a calm and rational response to it, okay? And if we do it this way, we can manage and we can be resilient in the smallest of occurrences. So just those little conversations where somebody says something and, that's a little bit hurtful. Okay, so let me just be resilient here then for a moment. I'm not just going to be strong and take it. I'm going to take a calm and rational moment to reflect on what that person said, and then I'm going to decide a conscious, very mindful response to it. So this is what resilience is about. It can be for those little moments, but it can also be for the big stuff. And that is fundamental change where, you go in on a Friday morning and you're told, your business is changing. You're told that your team is being disbanded. You're being told that your budget is being taken away. You can react in a tough kind of manner, so I'm going to power through this, or you can be resilient. You can do a calm, clear assessment of it, and then a calm, rational response. And so these are some of the things that we're going to tease out as we go through this, because to me, being resilient in this kind of form is a much nicer way of living. It's a much nicer way of actually, being in business and actually being in work. And it is something that is being recognized as a key skill. So these used to be called soft skills. These are not soft skills. These are core or key skills now for business professionals in whatever role you are, production, HR, finance, marketing, sales, whatever role you perform in your organization. This is a way to future-proof your career. CV Library did a survey in which they found that 57% of employers see resilience as a key skill when they recruit. 57% of employers seeing resilience as a really key skill. So it is a core skill. And 71% of those, so nearly 2/3 of those surveyed, said adaptability was a core aspect of resilience. In other words, the ability to assess a situation and a scenario and then be adaptable around it, to welcome change, to embrace change and not to fear it. So if you decide to come on this journey with me and actually critique kind of where you're at, and we're going to look at kind of where you're at right now and some of those triggers that, you know, might be setting you off, and then you start to think about maybe just taking those little moments to reflect and to calmly respond, then maybe you're going to start to future-proof yourself. And of course, this was one of the things that was at the forefront of putting this webinar series together, you know, actually sharing things that would be the building blocks to building a better career. So let's see kind of where we are right here, right now. Let's kind of test ourselves. What kind of things are your triggers? Okay, flexible working. You know, for lots of people, it's a real positive. Yeah, I can work from home part of the time, other parts of the time, you know, I can sort of travel into the office to meet my colleagues. You know, it's all very blended. You know, we're calling it now blended working. For some people, that is not a good thing. They want to return to what used to be called the old normal. Well, the world has changed, the world has moved on. We don't have that anymore. So how do you respond to flexible working? Is that a thing that you're needing to be resilient for? You know, maybe your home environment isn't, you know, conducive to home working. Maybe actually the commute you really got put off and actually you want to spend all your time at home. Flexible working is one of those things that means we need to be resilient. The uncertainty of the future with COP26, with, you know, the pandemic, with, you know, vaccinations, with, you know, the different style of working in different industries now, with some businesses completely pivoting. The uncertainty of the future is something that for many of us is a stressor. It is a challenge. And actually change in itself and uncertainty is something that we're going to be really testing ourselves with. And with that, of course, comes job insecurity, market chaos. I mean, do you know if your business is going to still be in business? You know, have your customers disappeared to somewhere else since, you know, coming through the pandemic? Has that put pressures on the budgets and the resources that you have? You know, and are you actually being served with kind of fake news? You know, who knows who you can trust these days? Now, I'm being a little bit kind of sort of pedantic here with all of these examples, but, you know, for lots of us, this is our new reality. You know, you don't really know where to turn. You don't really know who you can rely on. So resilience is something that is testing us in all forms and shapes and guises as we look at both our professional lives, but also our personal lives. And of course, if we fail to react positively and calmly to some of those challenges, then we see the manifestation of stress-related illness. It just happens. Stress-related illness, apparently, according to the UK Health and Safety Executive, so a reliable body researching and monitoring the trends in this area, say that over 50% of work days are now lost due to sickness in stress-related illness. So this is all about lack of resilience. This is all about feeling subservient to what might be perceived as stressful encounters or situations that we're being put under and that we're not taking control of and that we're feeling subservient to and that we actually haven't got the power to change. Well, as we go through this, and I'm going to share some tools with you in a little while, hopefully you will feel that you can take some of that power back, because we don't want to be falling into that 50%. We want to be empowered. We want to be taking control. And then whatever the world throws at us, to be able to calmly assess the situation, to be able to calmly respond to it, and to just feel like we're not going to be overrun by these kind of, you know, super, super challenging situations. So by developing effective strategies for reducing vulnerability to stress and the impact of adversity, and I would add in there of perceived adversity, and I'll explain that in a minute, it is possible to strengthen and develop personal resilience. So these are psychological techniques that allow us to actually take ownership of what is perceived adversity. And we're going to see that as we go through some of these examples and some of these techniques. Because what one person takes on as being a challenge or as a stressor, somebody else sees as an opportunity. So why is that? Why is it that some people would see a situation as being, wow, I welcome that, this is going to be exciting, right? And other people say, I need to run for cover, I can't cope. I'm not judging here. I'm just saying this is the reality, that psychologically, some people both seem to be better programmed to be resilient in challenging situations, but also, and this is an and or, some people seem to have learned strategies to cope. So I'm going to be sharing with you some of the things that these people who seem to be just really almost like superpowered, and if you're one of these people who looks at some of these challenging situations and says, I find this all too much, then what is it that we can actually learn from these potentially more resilient people? I'm not saying they're better people. So I'm not judging. I'm not saying that you're a lesser person because you aren't resilient, because this affects all of us to a smaller or greater extent. But why is it that some of us do some of these things that make us less resilient? Well, a lot of us, and this really is a lot of us, and I would suggest this is probably the vast majority of us, do self-destructive storytelling. In other words, we talk ourselves out of coping. We talk ourselves down. We look for the reasons why we can't. We draw on experiences from the past where, well, it didn't work last time, or well, I've seen she or he didn't cope with it, so I'm probably not going to be able to cope either. We tell ourselves unsupportive and unhelpful stories. Why do we do that? Well, for some of us, that is our natural habit of doing it. And again, I'm not judging. I'm not saying you shouldn't be doing that. Storytelling can actually help you to make sense of a situation. And when we look at self-reflection in that upcoming webinar, we will look at storytelling because it is an important personal skill that you can use to critique a scenario or a situation. But self-destructive storytelling, where we really talk ourselves out of our capability to respond and adapt, is not helpful. We might also be starting from a point of low self-esteem and low self-confidence. And I sympathize with everybody who feels that they have a lower level of self-esteem than average, or that they're starting from a point where they don't feel self-confident and self-assured. We don't have the time to go into that today. We're talking about resilience, and self-esteem and self-confidence is a whole other story. But these are two things that can actually, block and be blockers to building a resilient kind of self-habit, if you like. So just reflect on it. Where is your self-esteem and your self-confidence right now? If it's very high, well, you're on a high platform to building resilient skills. If you're low self-esteem and you do not really consider yourself as having, great self-confidence, then it's not that you can't do it, because you certainly can do it, but it might just be that it might take a little bit more time. So maybe just a little bit more patience could be required. It may be that you're not resilient because you have some mental health issues. A lot of people, as we've seen here, are being affected by stress and anxiety right now. And of course, this will have an impact on whether or not we feel in the right place to be resilient. So I'm not expecting you to go from 0% to 100% just as a result of this webinar or the tools that I'm going to be talking to you about in a moment. What I'm saying is that this is about recognizing and identifying with some of these things as being challenges that may well be part of this kind of soup that you're starting with. And then when you add these resilience tools in, you're coming from maybe a slightly different perspective to maybe others around you. And that is fine. We've all got our baggage. We've all got our previous life that we're bringing to the mix here. So we're not judging. We're not saying it so you can't do it because you've got this situation at home, or you've got this situation at work, or maybe just because you've got a very past mindset, you don't have a future mindset, so you're not looking to the future. You can't do resilience. That is completely untrue. Everybody can build resilient habits. Okay, they can practice resilient skills, and it just might be that one of the techniques that I'm going to share with you could be a way of actually maybe just moving the game to somewhere else where you want to be in your life. Okay, so we can't, as I say, in this particular session, go deeply into these, but just recognize that if you're not feeling particularly resilient and you're feeling subservient to the world around you, both in work and at home, then these could be some of the triggers and some of the reasons why you're struggling right now. So the converse is, what makes some people seem like they are just a little bit more resilient? Well, they're doing these kinds of things. They have very clear personal goals. They know where they're going. They have a future focus and a relatively optimistic outlook. When I see this optimistic, I just always try and sort of steer people away from their super positive people. You don't have to be super positive to be resilient, but you need an optimistic, sort of accepting outlook of the future. Okay, so by being optimistic, that means that you're accepting of a neutral to positive outcome of something, but it doesn't mean you have to go in with the rah rah, everything is positive and I will not accept negative. Because if you're doing resilience correctly, you're having to critique and reflect on the situation, which in itself could be quite negative. So yeah, some kind of optimistic outlook, but not necessarily super positive. They definitely have patience. The more resilient people are the ones willing to just take the foot off the gas for a moment and just critique where they're at. They accept a context or a situation for what it is. Okay, so they're not judgmental at the very first drop of the hat. They're not just going to jump in with a response. They're going to reflect. They're going to kind of take all perspectives into account. They're going to listen to both sides of the argument. They're going to see what the opportunities and the threats in the situation is. They're going to just critique. They're going to take time out, and they're going to realize that they're not part of the problem. They're just the observer. So resilient people kind of really take all of this stuff on board. They listen, they critique, they welcome the opportunity to adapt and to change. They don't just say that, you know, this is always how we've done it. You know, the least resilient people are those who just sit there and say, well, it'll never work. It's never worked in the past, can't work in future. And then they clam up, they fold their arms and they sit there, you know, really blocked off. That is not resilience. The most resilient people will be welcoming. They won't always want to change, but they'll be welcoming of the opportunity to change. And that is fundamentally different in a mindset to those who are, you know, unresilient. So there's an interesting sort of link here between being resilient and actually being adaptable. So the very first thing to becoming resilient is to think about, how adaptable am I? Because they're distinct things. You know, you could be resilient but not adaptable and vice versa, but they are intertwined. And for a healthy, happy lifestyle, a healthy, happy business, you really want to be thinking about these two things. So resilience is the ability to recover or cope with difficulties, but adaptability is the ability to adjust to those difficulties, to move forward. Okay, so this is important. It's an important thing. So if you can almost create in yourself a feeling that you're going to be curious, even if you don't feel like you're welcoming change, but curious about change, then you by definition are becoming more resilient. So think about that. How do I welcome change? How could I just kind of sit with the opportunity to adapt and change something? How does that feel? How does that kind of, you know, resonate with me? If it's a real barrier and it's a real turnoff right now, then maybe that's something to be thinking about. How adaptable am I? How welcoming am I of change? Because resilient leaders and employees definitely do not shy away from challenges and from change. And in fact, what they do is they actually welcome change and see it as an opportunity rather than a threat. So even if something comes at them in what could be perceived as a negative way, what they'll do is they'll say, I'm going to reframe that, and I'm going to actually turn that through 180 degrees, and I'm going to reword it such that it's the inverse of it. So rather than it being something that is not, I'm going to say, well, okay, if that's the not, what is the it? What is the positive of it? And so what that allows you to do is to view both sides of the coin. And so that is one of the very, very first steps that allows you to kind of take this different perspective. And that is really, really important. And the resilient, adaptable people who are really taking sort of, you know, great sort of, you know, positivity out of change are those who can see that there's a we in resilience, because they won't do it in isolation. What they'll do is they will be looking for this as a team sort of exercise. They'll be looking for win-wins. So when something happens at work, or when something happens, you know, with a colleague or within your team, the resilient person will not be then looking at it and saying, oh, yes, I knew those two were going to argue, or, yes, well, I could have told you so. What they'll be doing is they will be looking for win-win scenarios that are a result of changing something. So they will not accept that change is inevitable. They will basically, they will always be looking to say, okay, we know that change is going to happen, and so we're going to embrace it, and we're going to actually be proactively looking for it. So we're actually going to preempt that change is coming. And so the most resilient people are very welcoming of change, but they're also then exhibiting sort of positive and proactive behaviors in terms of being adaptable. So what we've already seen so far then, with those 3 or 4 examples, is that resilience is actually multidimensional. Okay, you can't just wake up one morning and say, yep, I'm resilient because I've got it in my head, I'm thinking about it. Resilience comes through actions. It definitely comes in thoughts and reflections, but you've then got to act on it. So you've actually then got to do something. And it is also based around your attitudes, as we've seen there. If you are welcoming of change, and if you're welcoming of adaptability, then that whole attitude then starts to build in this kind of almost a dynamic or an energy that then starts to say, hold on, something's changing here. I'm welcoming, the opportunity to get a problem coming at me. I'm welcoming the opportunity to kind of find a real barrier or a real issue sort of, cropping up in my work life, so that I can actually practice this stuff. So I don't want everything just to be nice and calm and collected and everything's positive. Actually, I want a problem. Send me a problem my way, because I want to put some of these skills into play. And once you start to kind of feel that, you start to realize, hey, something's going on here. Resilience is actually quite a cool thing to play with, because it allows me to do a whole series of changes in my world. And for me, this is where cognitive behavioral theory comes in. Now, if you've seen some of the previous webinars, you'll know that I'm really passionate about CBT. It's a really interesting concept that can, really foster change and foster the way that you adapt to the world around you, and particularly in a work context. And this is the interrelationship between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Okay, and in resilience, this is where it all starts, because I'd like you to be thinking, okay, if I'm going to welcome change, if I'm going to welcome some challenges, if I'm going to welcome some adversity, and I mean really welcome it, where am I going to welcome it from? Am I going to be behaving differently so it inspires a few problems and challenges? Or am I going to go and uncover some uncomfortable stuff in work? Because if I do, then actually that will trigger off me thinking about this stuff differently, and it'll then make me feel differently about those problems. Am I going to sit there and am I going to think about this stuff? In other words, Neil's going to share some tools in just a moment, and some ideas that I can actually take into my workplace, and I'm going to think deeply about how I can put these into place. So then if I've got those in my toolkit, how will that make me feel differently? And will that feeling then trigger off me actually behaving in a slightly different way? So when I'm in that next team meeting and people are trying to avoid the nasty, awkward subjects, will I be then thinking, well, hey, I've got a tool for that, or I've got a technique that we could use. How's that going to make me feel? And then how will I behave? How will those people then start to think about me? And how will that make me feel? Do you see what's happening here? There's a loop. So you can put resilience here in either a thought, in a feeling, or in a behavior. So you can embrace these tools. You can actually feel differently as a result of, putting some of these tools into practice. And of course, then those feelings change how you behave. And your behaviors, your thoughts and your feelings will manifest in the emotion that you encounter when anything then happens to an adverse or negative way in your work. So the next big challenge, drops on your desk, or that, really awkward situation happens, and you can then drop straight back into your CBT loop and think, okay, I know how to get out of this. All I need to do is just change either how I'm feeling about that problem, how I behave towards it, or the words and the language I use to describe it. We'll come on to language and descriptions in just a moment, but can you see what's happening here? There's control that you're able to take, and you don't have to then just jump in and try and problem solve. All you need to do is recognize that this is adversity, this is a problem, this is a challenge, and then use the CBT loop to think, okay, as I reflect on this and as I identify it and as I go deeper into what is this thing, I can then choose to behave or think or feel about it in a different way. And as soon as I do that, it doesn't become a problem anymore. It becomes an opportunity. So CBT is just one of these, hugely powerful mindsets that just allows you to reflect and take control and move the game on. We can then introduce some other things to kind of add on as an extra layer sort of around that CBT stuff. We can be thinking about what we might term the 5 pillars of resilience. There are 5 sort of impacts, if you like, when you start to kind of do this. And these have come out of an organization called High Speed Training. And they talk about emotional well-being. So one of the pillars of resilience is emotional well-being. I mean, can you imagine doing that CBT stuff, that kind of little self-reflective moment when you get your next big challenge hitting you in the face? Can you imagine the inner drive as you go and seek new challenges to solve new problems, as you go and help others? It's going to feel pretty darn good, isn't it? Can you imagine actually how this is going to make you feel more resilient when you start to focus on the future and actually how solving a particular challenge might make an improved situation at work or at play? Can you think about how those social relationships that you have with everybody around you in your world of work and at home, how people are going to view you differently when they see you and they think, my God, that person just really responded well. I mean, I would never have coped like they did. But of course, you now know it's not about coping. It's about evaluation. It's about clarity of the context of that situation. And then it's about figuring out, how am I going to reframe it? How am I going to respond to it? And of course, then your physical health, because you're just going to be feeling good, because you're going to feel almost invulnerable, unvulnerable, whatever the word is. You're not going to have a vulnerability here in the way that potentially you used to. So you're going to be able to use these concepts and these thinking as the ideas to kind of really sort of relax into any scenario, no matter how good or how challenging. So there's a lot of stuff that we can actually use this for. And as I say, the CBT layer is really, really important. So how can we start to take some of these things about being adaptable, welcoming change, thinking about ways of kind of reframing the language that we use to describe a situation? How can we use this within a workplace to kind of work with the team around us? Well, it's all about, as it has been with all of these topics that we've talked about in this series, it's all about clear communication. And clear communication will foster the resilience that you're after. So why don't you co-create a resilience manual as a team or as a group or as a department? Sit down and have some fun with figuring out, maybe do some scenario planning or some scenario training of how we'd respond to a particular challenge. So what happens if the sky falls down on our business? Or what happens if the rug gets pulled from under our feet? What happens if? And actually do some scenario planning and then create a manual for how you collectively as a team respond to this. Who forms, the team? Who steps into what roles because of their skills or their preferences? Who then sort of project manages it? Who kind of leads? And then after you've done that, who's going to kind of debrief after a crisis to figure out, well, actually, what did we do well? What do we do differently next time? Clear communication of these 3 areas really can help to foster resilience across a team, because it isn't all about you using resilience to just kind of rise above the others and say, hey, look, I'm resilient. I can do anything. You can't touch me now because I'm resilient. You can't hurt me. This is not what it's about. This is about sharing your knowledge and your skills and the way that you've encountered some of these challenges and maybe coped, maybe adapted, maybe changed, and reframed those kind of descriptions of those challenges, and then use those skills and knowledge that you've got to work with your team to empower them. And so for me, creating some kind of resilience manual or resilience guide, if you've ever done brand guidelines and you're in a marketing role or a branding role and you've created brand guidelines, you know how powerful they are. They set the scene and the tone of voice for your brand. Well, this is the resilience equivalent, if you like. So you create a resilience guide or a resilience manual, what to do when this happens. Here are some tools to cope with this scenario. How many businesses do this? Not many, really. Yes, they've got policies and they've got, regulation and they've got this, that, and the other, but who's actually got a guide, a step-by-step guide for coping with a challenge and being resilient? Not many. So would this create a competitive advantage? Would this create a scenario or a situation where it's actually a really great place to work? The answer is probably yes. So it does require, you kind of collaborating and working with those around you if you're using resilience in a workplace setting, because of course it is about being vulnerable and opening up. It's about identifying, as now a lot of us do, the whole kind of mental health debate at work, is a much more open conversation than it ever was. So this is about being vulnerable and asking for help. If you are feeling as though you are not coping and you're not exhibiting some of these resilient skills, and that that others in the team are, then it's about sharing and opening up and actually creating and nurturing a work style and a communication style that consistently builds trust with others. This is where kind of real teamwork happens. Teamwork isn't all about building bridges and sort of role playing and stuff. It's about actually what happens on a day-to-day basis. And that is about opening up and being vulnerable and just being transparent as a team. So those who are more resilient helping those who aren't, and vice versa. Because of course it is just a spectrum, and we can all learn from others who are in different places on that spectrum. And we can learn also from our mistakes more than we can from our successes. So this comes back to my point earlier, which is let's welcome the bad news. Let's welcome the challenges. Let's not just be looking for positive outcomes all the time, because, to be honest, when did you actually learn from when something went well? The most of the learning that comes in life, and definitely at work, comes from when we have challenges and when we either overcome them or don't. I'm not looking for perfect outcomes here. What I'm suggesting is that we just welcome some bad news. We welcome a crisis, because then it shows us, our real selves, and actually how we can then really take stock, frame the context, maybe you need to reframe it to get control over it, and then adapt and change. This is about resilience. This is all about really opening up and honesty and transparency within our team. And so, of course, in a crisis, this is when we really see it kind of come through in its biggest sense. So resilient people in a crisis, they would view it as a challenge, not as a paralyzing event. So learning from failures and learning from mistakes and seeing this really as an opportunity for growth. There are many studies, many sort of pieces of research where, it is very, very evident that, you will learn more when a big crisis strikes. But if you've done your resilience manual, if you're all together as a team and you know your preferences, you know the skill sets, talk about resilience in a team bonding way, and then certainly then you've got the tools. It also relies on commitment. Resilient people are extremely committed to their lives and their goals. They take ownership. So it is about adaptability and change and all those amazing things that we talked about that are pretty positive, but also it's about taking ownership of the future. So they will have a plan in place. They will be executing against that plan, and they will know that they're going to need contingencies, because life is unpredictable. So resilience in a big crisis where a big challenge happens on that journey, resilient people will say, hey, I knew it was going to happen. I didn't really know it was going to look like this, but I've got to now sit back, reflect, take stock, and figure out how I'm going to respond to it. They don't feel stressed by those challenges. It is really conceptually quite simple. I know in practice it's hard, particularly if you're not a resilient person naturally, but these are things that we can do to gain the control over the crisis. This is the third of the C's here, the control. So resilient people will be spending time and energy on situations they can control, or at least have some influence over. Because where you put your effort and emotions and the time and your energies, if that's where it will have most impact, it's where you are more empowered. And of course, that will give you the confidence to do it again and again and again, so that you can then build this resilience skill set and this resilience mindset. So it isn't something that's going to happen overnight. And as I said right at the start, for some of this is going to be a long journey. but by just thinking about, maybe I could be a little more adaptable, maybe I could welcome change, maybe I could be curious and an observer the next time something really hits me hard. Maybe I could just take those early steps on this resilience journey, because it could, in theory, be fun. And by making disruption your friend, lovely little quote from the Muller Institute, make disruption your friend. Don't ever going forward use the word normal. Okay, that would be my biggest recommendation here. As soon as you hear somebody say the word normal, they clearly have missed the point. You can't be accepting of normal and be resilient, in my book. To be resilient, you have to accept that change and disruption and chaos is your friend, okay, ultimately. And so if you're looking to go back to normal, and we always hear that phrase, don't we? We have over the last 18 months. But if you're looking to go back to normal, well, I would say you've got a lot of work to do to become resilient, because that is not the way of the world. Accepting that disruption is your friend and welcoming it and saying, hey, you know, the old normal, that kind of shaped me to be who I am. But now I'm curious about the future. Now I'm curious about what this world might look like. I'm going to actually welcome some change in, because I want to see how I respond. And it's not going to be me. It's going to be my reactions. It's going to be my thoughts, feelings, and behaviors over that situation. I am not that situation. I am not that problem. The problem is external to me. And so then I take control, and then I can be resilient, because I can actually welcome that thing to happen in front of me, but no, it's not me. Most people with most sort of engagement problems with issues and challenges where they've had to be resilient are because they absorb, they take on board what they would perceive as the stress of the situation. Resilient people have a natural and healthy distance of themselves to the situation. So think about that. Could you put maybe some little invisible barriers between you and the situation? Could you distance yourself just enough so that you can take that objective view over that situation? Because if you feel like you are part of the situation, and I'm talking even in when you're in a conversation and you think we're having a big argument here, I'm part of this. No, you're not. Your words that you've projected out there are part of it, but it's not you. It's partly the other person and their words, but it's not you. And so actually making disruption your friend from a distance is a really neat way of starting to reframe. And this is all about reframing the scenario. It's all about taking control over what might be negative and that you feel you have less control over. And of course, for a lot of us, we're seeing this in our marketplaces right now. You know, who really knows what the market's going to do? Who knows what the economy is going to do? Who knows where our customers are going to go next? You know, we don't. But if we can foster this kind of future growth, explorative, challenging and interesting kind of mindset, then we may well find that there's a scenario here to kind of change something, to look at this and actually to kind of not say no to things, but actually say not now. And I often find this, you know, when I'm working with clients or when I'm seeing, you know, sort of other people in sort of team situations, you know, there is this kind of idea that, you know, people, you know, when they say no, are sort of perceived as, well, no, I'm saying no. So therefore, you know, that's negative. And Julie just put a comment in the chat here. It isn't about saying no, never. It could be about saying no, not now. Okay, there's a big difference in the way that we say no. No, it doesn't have to be, I'm not going to do it. No doesn't have to be, I'm being super resilient here, I haven't got time for that, I'm not going to do it. It can be, I've critiqued this as a priority versus all the other things I'm doing. I'm not going to prioritize it right now. So you're still saying no, but you're just saying it in a way such that, you know, I hear you, I value your opinion, but it's just not for now. And resilient people would do it in that way. They would take stock, they would reflect, they'd put it into the context of everything else that's going on, and then they'd make a decision. Okay. And so it's the way that you then communicate that back. So no, never is very different to no, not now. So maybe try that one, Julia, and thank you for your question in there, because that was very timely when that appeared. But it is a very, very interesting idea of trying to make, and manage this kind of inevitable uncertainty that kind of triggers lots of us, and it is about really accepting the control. You can't control everything. What we're not saying here is you can control everything that goes on around you. Of course you can't. It's not how it works. But accepting that you can control how you feel, behave, or think about a scenario, and how you frame it around you, and of course it's not you, it's a scenario or a situation, gives you some form of control. Even if it's perceived control, it will make you more resilient, because it gives you that space and time to be able to come back with an informed decision as to how you're going to react. Managing, balancing home and work life as well is another one of those things. We've seen over the last 5 to 10 years a real blurring of work and home life, people taking work home and then getting sort of ground down by that, and the fact that emails can come in at any time, and email came in at 10 o'clock at night and I feel guilty because I didn't answer it straight away. All of these kinds of uncertain things that happen in our lives, we can manage those by being resilient. You can make a judgment call. You're not saying, no, I'm not going to answer those emails, but you can just, for yourself, say, just not now. I'm prioritizing something else. And you can also mindfully validate what we might term negative thinking. So if you get a negative thought and you're thinking, oh gosh, we talked all about this thing in that webinar about resilience, and Neil was saying I've got to be more adaptable, I've got to welcome change, I've got to do all this stuff, and I've got to talk to my team, I've got to create a resilience manual, all this stuff, but I still have negative thoughts. That is fine. We all do. We're human. This is not about being perfect. This is not about not having vulnerability. This is not about positive thinking, but it's about mindfully validating any negative thinking that is actually not serving you. Because some negative thinking is very positive. If negative thinking forces you to not do something because it's dangerous, well, clearly that's a very obvious example of where you're using it positively. But mindfully validating those negative thoughts is where we're coming from here. So actually, it's the time to reflect and assess and then decide on your response. That is resilience. Okay, so welcome the negative thought. Why am I having this negative thought? We'll talk about this a lot more in the self-reflection webinar that we're going to do, because this is one of those little techniques that is so interesting in any scenario. Mindfully validating, why am I responding like this? Why am I feeling like that? Why did I just behave like that? Again, CBT coming through again. And changing your language can often help you to manage this uncertainty. The way that we frame, the way that we talk about stuff is so important. It's really critical how we talk about it. People who are optimistic see the effects of bad events as temporary rather than permanent, for example. So, they might say something like, my boss didn't like the work I did on that project, rather than what you hear some people say is, my boss never likes my work. Where does that take you? It takes you to a whole different place. That is going to knock you. That's not resilience. Resilience is, hey, I missed the mark that time. Okay, fine. Why? Let's reflect on the why. It's not a lifelong commitment to, oh my gosh, I'm a terrible person, I got it wrong. But it's just, hey, in that moment, it didn't kind of hit the mark, and that's fine. So it is about the permanency here of resilience is kind of like, it's only the moment. This stuff's going to change because change is inevitable. So it's going to move on. So, if we welcome that, then it's great. Second of these three P's, pervasiveness. Resilient people don't let setbacks or bad events affect unrelated areas of their lives. In other words, they wouldn't say, I'm no good at anything, but they would say, I'm not very good at this. And that's fine. That's a reality. And it's about being true to yourself. We've all got specialist skills and we're all good at some things and not good at others. But the non-resilient person will just let that eat into the rest of their life. So pervasiveness of negativity is a real challenge, actually, if you're a non-resilient person. So again, another thing to reflect on. How do I let stuff bleed into the rest of my life? Do I take those work things home with me? Could I distance them from myself? Could I actually make them just stay in one place so I can deal with them when they're there? But actually, when I'm doing something else, I just let it move on. Who knows? We have a choice. And personalization is the third of the P's: permanence, pervasiveness, personalization. People who have resilience don't blame themselves when bad events occur. Instead, they see other people or the circumstances as the cause. So they might say, I didn't get the support I needed to finish that project successfully, rather than, I messed that project up because I can't do my job. So they don't take it on board. They will see the distance between themselves and a situation, because you aren't your situation. But without being mindful, without taking those moments, it's very, very easy to miss the mark. And it's very, very easy to get caught up in that kind of situation. So this is about being observant. This is about distancing. Resilience at work is about observation and objectivity. You know, stressful scenarios are an unavoidable aspect of everyday life, but resilient people will monitor their responses, particularly when they're under stress and duress. And being actively mindful, this will give you an opportunity to spot patterns, to spot trends, or certain things that you think, every time I do this, this happens, and that's how it makes me feel. And just the very nature of spotting it is generally enough. You don't necessarily have to solve it every time. Resilience isn't always about solving problems, but it's about the identification and the framing of the context of that problem. And that's really important. And here we can use something that's called the RAIN technique. Is one of just a few little takeaways I want to finish off with here. The RAIN technique is recognize the situation, accept the situation is that it just is. It's not you, it's not them, it just is what it is. Interpret the situation and then nurture yourself within the situation. What is it I need? What is it I can do? Who else do I need? How can I do something to change what I need to change? What I've decided as I interpret this that I need to do differently. So the RAIN technique, recognize, accept, interpret, and nurture, gives you real control and real power over the scenario going forward. And it just allows you then to build these resilient skills in a very simplistic way. This is not complicated, and allows you to become more resilient right here, right now. And so the two things I would suggest to becoming more resilient, wherever you are on that scale, is that you distance yourself from being the situation, okay? A crisis is not you. You're within the crisis. So how are you going to deal with it? Distance yourself from being the situation and reframe anything. And you can do this and practice this and play with this. It's really fun. Reframe anything by changing the language you use to describe it. Resilience is all about taking the control. So if you don't like the way you're thinking about something, change the feelings or the behaviors around it. If you don't like the way you're feeling about something or behaving in a situation, change the language to think about it. So think about it using different language. And if you do those two things and couple that maybe with the RAIN technique, I will assure you that you'll be taking steps in the right direction to become more resilient.